Hi, I'm Rebecca Valcarcel. Let's take a look at Ernest Hemingway's short story, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. It can be a confusing story, partly because the dialogue has a lot of subtext. That means that people don't say exactly what they mean, they're implying a lot. So let's walk through the story. We start out in a cafe. Picture a outdoor patio or a terrace where they've got chairs where people can have a drink or eat. Kind of like the outside of a Starbucks, except a little more pretty. This is where the story takes place. And we have three characters: an old man who's sitting and drinking at the cafe, a young waiter who waits on him, and an older waiter who doesn't wait on the old man, but who understands the old man and his psychology and some of what the old man is going through. Now, if you've ever been a little depressed, a little down, or you've been through a dark period in your life when you really did not want to go to sleep when it came time for bedtime, then you have felt the same way that the old man feels and that the old waiter feels in this story. Sometimes you just can't quite let go watching videos on the internet or watching movies one after another, and you don't want to go to bed. Now, why don't we want to go to bed? Is there an emptiness that we can't face when there's silence and there's darkness? Whatever it is, that's the same situation the old man is in. And that is why he finds himself here at 2:30 in the morning at this clean, well-lighted cafe. Now, the young waiter wants nothing more than to go home. He wants to clean up, get everything in order so they can leave. He has a wife waiting for him. Meanwhile, the older waiter understands how pleasant it is for the old man to sit here in a public place, but not really interacting with the public. In fact, the old man is rather deaf, and so he can't interact a lot with other people, but at least he's not alone in his bed in the dark. Okay, so the older waiter has some compassion, and throughout the story we see that. At one point, the younger waiter says, well, I want to be home an hour early because that hour is valuable to me, and it's not valuable to this old man. But the older waiter says, yes, it is. It's just as valuable for him to sit here and fend off that loneliness, that darkness, as it is for you to go home and enjoy your wife and, crawl into bed. We have a place in the story where we see a young couple walking by. But instead of being a happy young couple in a normal way, it's a soldier and a woman who does not have a head covering. So these people too are keeping loneliness away, but by finding each other. But yet what do they have? This woman without a head covering probably is a prostitute, or at the very least kind of an escort type woman who is not going to be in a long-term relationship with this soldier. They are not in love, and we have some hints from the waiters who say, well, as long as that soldier gets what he's after, isn't it fine? Isn't it a good way to spend his time? Well, maybe it is, but that soldier is lonely too, and likely the woman is lonely as well. So we have a whole cast of characters who are lonely, except for the young waiter who's wanting to get home to his wife. The young waiter has a couple of other advantages. Besides having a wife, he's young and he has a job. And the older waiter says, well, you have everything. And the young waiter says, well, you do too. But the older waiter knows better than that. He knows that there's something internal that he's missing. And he does have a job, but he doesn't have a wife, and he doesn't have the potential anymore that he used to. So there's a lot of loss here in this story, a sense of the beauties of the world and the love of the world not really being available to this old man or the old waiter anymore. Now, one of the most confusing parts of the story is when we lose track of who is talking. I actually went down my copy here and I wrote O and Y for old waiter, young waiter, old waiter, young waiter. For the most part, they switch back and forth. But there's a point when it seems like the young waiter says two things in a row. Hemingway writes, I am one of those who like to stay late at the cafe, the older waiter said. So he tells us exactly that the older waiter said that. Thank you, Hemingway. But the next line, is the young man kind of ribbing the older waiter, saying, "Oh, you're one of those who likes to sleep with a nightlight, aren't you?" And then the next line says, "I want to go home to bed." Now that sounds like the young waiter's voice, even though it seems like it's time for the older waiter to speak in this back and forth pattern. But it has to be the young waiter speaking that line, because after that, Hemingway tells us directly that the older waiter says, "We are of two different kinds." And he draws a distinction between the reluctance of the older waiter to close up the cafe and the eagerness of the younger waiter, the impatience to get it closed down and go home. So it's my academic opinion that the younger waiter speaks twice. From there, it's relatively easy. The young waiter says, "Oh, look, the old man could go to a bar, right? There's bodegas open all night long." And we are in Spain, so we have some Spanish thrown in, bodega being one of those. Why can't the guy go to a bar? Why do we have to sit here and keep the cafe open for him? But the old waiter knows that a bar is a quite different place, and that if you keep the cafe open, it's kind of like keeping a little bit of beauty available, a bit of a civilized way to be out at 2:30 in the morning, instead of kind of a pathetic way, standing at the bar, looking lonely, looking kind of lame, sad. No, at the cafe, you can have some dignity, he says. And that is why the cafe is so important to the old man and to the old waiter. Now let's talk about the cryptic moment when the old waiter starts to say the Lord's Prayer. Our Nada, who art in nada, nada be thy name, and so on. This is a unique way for Hemingway to get across the state of mind this man is in. What an original idea. But the man substituting nada for almost all the words in this prayer implies that religion is not a comfort. For him, it's just more meaninglessness. He doesn't feel close to God, even though this is supposed to be a prayer. So he's disillusioned, he's distant, he doesn't have an active spiritual life. There's just this emptiness. And the technique of putting this word nothing into the Lord's Prayer is startling and conveys this loneliness very well. Finally, at the end of the story, we see the old waiter by himself. And in fact, he does go to a bar to avoid going to bed, to not face his loneliness. He goes to the bar. And at first, when the waiter there, or the bartender, says, "Well, what do you want? What's yours?" he says. Our waiter answers nada. Now, nada is the Spanish word for nothing. Now, he did not come to the bar to buy nothing. So obviously this nothingness is already on his mind. And the word nothing appears earlier in the story as well. So when the bartender says, "What do you want?" and he says nothing, we know that really that's not true. And so the bartender says, "Ugh, this crazy guy." And finally the waiter says, "Okay, what I really want is a copita. I want a little drink." But he doesn't stay there long. He starts to feel like this is kind of pathetic too. So he goes home, but as he's walking home, we get the sense that he's rationalizing to himself, because he says, maybe I don't want to go home. I don't want to go to bed because I have insomnia. That must be it. Yeah, well, the reader knows better. That's not insomnia, not a clinical disorder or a medical condition. This is just that loneliness of the heart that we all feel sometimes, but that is nagging him and stealing his centeredness and his feeling of peace or purpose. He's not necessarily clinically depressed either, but he is going through a dark night. All right, I hope this has helped you understand A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. There's lots more to say about the story, but I think this will give you a good start. Join me for another video.